Hi everyone, I'm Erica Olson with On Strategy. Welcome to today's whiteboard video on strategic objectives. This is the second in a two-part series. Today we're going to be talking about a framework, how we use strategic objectives to build a framework, a strategic framework. The first video is on defining strategic objectives, what they are, how to build them, the anatomy of some examples. So check that out first if you haven't watched that. If you have, let's jump in. So as we mentioned on the last video, strategic objectives are your bridge between your vision, that big future state, and your annual execution goals and initiatives. They are just the crux of any great strategic plan. So they are your strategic framework. They are the framework for your plan. They create that scaffolding that scaffolds up to your vision and down to your goals and your initiatives. So let's talk about some different ways that a framework happens. Before we do though, let's walk through some criteria of what makes a good strategic objectives. So first things first is they need to be multi-year in nature. 3 years, 5 years, whatever works for you, just longer term than annual. They need to have some runway. A vision bridge, we already talked about that. They are absolutely the translation from your vision to your annual execution. Let's agree less is more. If you have more than 6, you have too many. So full stop. The more you have, the bigger your plan. No one needs bigger plans. Really like to think about strategic objectives. Again, no matter what you call them, they are broad statements of where. They are articulated as little mini vision statements. Then there's a handful of them, as we said. They tell you where you're going. Goals, or the next layer down, are what's, and then the hows would be your initiatives. So that's how we think about what they do for our strat plan. They should be your top focus. So really awesome strategic objectives are great talking points for any CEO or executive team to say, hey, these are the priorities. These are the objectives we're driving for this year and beyond. So top focus. And let's remember, strategic objectives are not just a mishmash of department goals. They actually are company-wide direction. All right, here's a couple of frameworks, a couple of ways to think about your strategic objectives. I'm going to walk through a few examples, but if you want more examples, check out our white paper for a whole bunch more. So here's example one framework. This is a traditional balanced scorecard framework. If you're familiar with that, if you're not, don't worry about it. What makes this great is it's holistic. So we like to see strategic objective frameworks that cover all aspects of the organization. So let's start with financial. It's often great to have a financial strategic objective. That might sound something like financial sustainability, consistently achieve year-over-year growth. That would be an example of a financial strategic objective. Following from there, it's super important to take the customer perspective. So this is a customer market perspective. That might sound something like expanding our footprint through vertical integration. That might be a strategic objective for this area. The next would be your operational excellence. So looking at the internal perspective, that might sound something like transform our operations to be fully digital and deliver digital services. The fourth might be people expertise. An example of that might be become the team of the future. So this is a traditional framework, if you will, again, borrowing the balanced scorecard structure. It's holistic. It tells a strategy story. It says if we have the right people in the right seats, loving their jobs, we are able to deliver amazing operations and a great customer experience and acquire new customers, generating a set of financial returns that show that we're successful. So that's the strategy story, bottom up in this case. A separate framework, or a different framework, might be by theme. And this is similar, but a little bit different. So one strategic objective might be revenue growth. It might be your whole growth theme. And then another strategic objective might be your profitability improvement or your bottom line theme, if you will. So all of the goals and initiatives under growth would be literally under growth, and your top line numbers here would be revenue. So separating out a little bit here. And then over here, this would be your theme in relation to everything you're doing to improve the bottom line, to improve profitability. So if you were to think about this, you're basically taking a theme, that's a growth theme, and you're taking a couple of items from here and this whole area here. And then you're taking your margin numbers and maybe cash flow, right? And your operational excellence, and that lives here. And then supporting all of that is the people area. We love to see strategic objective that is people specific. So this is more theme based, and this is more a balanced scorecard based. So those are two really great standard frameworks to think about how to build your strategic objectives in a holistic, comprehensive manner. Just a side note for my nonprofits and government listeners on the video today, we would flip-flop this around. We would put this at the top and this at the bottom. So just think about it that way. A couple of tips to wrap it up. Tell the story. A great set of strategic objectives tell the story. Tell the story that you're trying to tell about where you're going and why. Be compelling. Don't use words that you could find in anybody else's strategic plan. Use the words that are relevant to you and the message you want to send to your team. And start with placeholders. We like to just start with labels, build out the rest of your plan, and come back and finalize the language. That's really, really helpful, and it takes the pressure off of getting it perfect. So with that, thanks for tuning in. Subscribe to our social channels. Happy strategizing.